Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to MALN Opinion Plus, a weekly series airing every Friday. This is a space for opinions where we talk about current events and questions the Latino community is curious about. Today, we're joined by Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Boston, Lori Nelson. Welcome to our show, Lori. It is such a pleasure to have you with your expertise. I hope you're doing well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I was hoping we could begin our conversation talking a bit about your role, what are your tasks and responsibilities as Boston's Chief Resilience Officer?
Sure. So the role of Chief Resilience Officer is it's a little interesting, right? It's kind of complex. So essentially, we deal with all matters of race, equity, and resilience for the city of Boston. Very focused on what that means for the people we serve by way of transforming policy, program, and practice. That is how we provide services. That is how we think about policies and how we govern. And then certainly our programs that we hope through the work of this office will begin to look closely and be more defined by equity and racial equity and inclusion. That's the scope of the work.
Okay, that's beautiful, and it's a lot of crucial work. We'll have time to go into the specifics because as we'll look into it. I'm hoping you could tell us a bit, also starting off a bit about your professional career and what led you to this current position, and sort of what inspires your work or your passion behind this work that you've accomplished.
So it started off with a whole lot of background in politics, right? So my career in politics started, good God, maybe like 10 plus years ago. At the time, I was the executive director for the Black Caucus State House. And then from there, I went into a little bit of nonprofit, but really still focused on policy by default of my policy work. And then we went from there into working for Governor Deval Patrick around community impact, community work, and special projects. From there, I went to serve with Dr. Beverly Scott, again in state government, as her deputy director under the MBTA. And then I came back through city and did a quasi. I worked for the BHA as their director of communications, and also doing some special advisory work to the administrator. And then from there, I got a call around 2.5 years ago, I think now, a little more than that. And the Mayor Walsh, asked me to come on to this task of dealing with and unpacking and kind of mapping out the pathway forward around racial reckoning, around racial equity, and certainly around how the city continues to become a more equitable Boston. So that's been the journey. And again, it's like 10, maybe 12 plus years.
Wow, yeah, a lot of experience behind that. So I'm wondering next how you've seen the pandemic impact your work and also the Office of Resilience and Racial Equity this past year, and also entering this year, new year so far.
Sure. So, nobody could have imagined what happened literally around a year ago, or almost to the date, almost a year ago in 2020. And so when COVID hit, what was very clear is that there are different populations who historically are underserved in day-to-day operations of life, right? So your day-to-day life, certainly your BIPOC communities and those who have always been kind of like not having a seat at the table. You then add on to it a pandemic, right? And in a pandemic, you recognize that these disparities, they are enhanced, right? They don't go away, they actually are amplified. And so the work of the office has been to continue to be that voice, right? And in the places of public health and in the places of economic sustainability and recovery, in the places of resilience, just to ensure that we as a people are being sustained and our needs are being met and our voices are being heard. That has been the role of the office. We play a role by way of recommendations around what has been one of the pillar resource basis for COVID through this administration, which is the Resiliency Fund. And so our office has worked closely with the leads of strategic partnerships to ensure that Black and Brown immigrant populations also are receiving the resources, right, necessary not only to live, to sustain, but also to help the communities we serve. And so that has been the crucial work that we've done throughout 2020. And now, even as we're into the vaccine stages of COVID and also the testing sites, right, to ensure that, again, we are looking at this from an equitable lens, that communities that may have difficulty getting to or receiving these type of services are also at the forefront, right, of how we map this out and continue to lean towards and move toward whatever the new norm will be, right, having survived this pandemic. So that's what we do.
Thank you. That was a great explanation of that. You mentioned the Resilience Fund. I actually haven't heard of that. Could you talk a bit about that, how residents could learn more, access it, what it's used for?
Sure. So in the very early stages of COVID, the mayor was strategic in trying to consider ways to support underserved communities and businesses and organizations who literally work with the people that we serve. And so where certainly, there began to become a clear sense of major corporations giving back or pouring into communities that are underserved. There was a concerted effort by this administration to enhance that, to intensify that, to ensure that persons, again, who are historically overlooked, get services. COVID and the Resiliency Fund, it was defined by food security, defined by PPE distribution, and defined by programmatic programs and services that deal with the direct impact of meeting community needs. And so the fund actually just gave out its last I think it was 3.2 million on earlier this week. But in total, it was up in the almost 40 million or more that was raised and then distributed to different organizations, different community-based initiatives that were really aimed and focused on combating COVID. It has been wonderful to serve as advising in that space because we are confident that organizations that may have been overlooked by big corporations, right, were able to receive something from what we put forth. So that's what it's been about.
Definitely. That's great. That's important. I'm curious how the pandemic has also had progress, or not, how has it affected the progress on the city's comprehensive resilience strategy? You mentioned that some of the sort of issues that you're dealing regarding COVID have always been there for people of color. And so I'm wondering if the resilience strategy, if you were able to still progress with that since these are the same challenges they're facing, or if you had to sort of go off the book and, turn your resources to something else during this time.
So I think we need to also identify the fact that this was a dual pandemic. So in the midst of a health crisis and a health phenomenon that we had not seen in over 100 years, there was also a pandemic of race, right? And so what happens in the space of the unfortunate and untimely murdering of George Floyd and others, there's this racial reckoning that rises, right? And so we see protests, if you remember, you see global and national call to the streets, like this action that called for change, called for reform, called for ways that we begin to reimagine and address what has been really some of the root cause matters that predate certainly a COVID experience. And from a race perspective, we argue it is 400 plus years long, right? So the work that we have initially and put forth in this resilience strategy actually intensified, right? The need to ensure that we are dealing with reforms, the need to ensure that we are educating and informing and also providing spaces for conversations, not only about the history of race matters as it relates to the nation and certainly the city of Boston, but certainly in this pivotal point where there was an awakening on a different level. How do we then optimize these moments to continue to move forward around advocacy about our approach to how we govern, about how our approach to how we legislate and how we create policies that really will continue to move the needle forward. So we have been nonstop. And so it really has pulled the work up to the highest level. Because the goal now and across the board, you started seeing people very intentional about looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, very intentional about looking at trainings and ways that we educate and create safe spaces and environments for people to share, for people to grieve, for people to come together and to unify around these common causes. So that is how the work has continued. And again, I will submit that it has actually intensified because of that.
Gotcha. Okay, that was a beautiful way to put it. Because that's a good thing to bring up, really, the Black Lives Matter movement, how there has been such a sense of urgency towards disparity and equity among people of color across the U.S. Do you think this has made other governmental entities more open to talking to you, having meetings, making changes? Have people been, does this change sort of an energy, people you've been working with or anything?
So I think from a national perspective, if you even look at when we looked at a shift across the nation, right? So when the Biden-Harris administration comes in, one of the first things that you did see was this entire executive order, very detailed, that describes a racial reckoning type of framing, right? It dealt with reform. It deals with reforms. It deals with disparities. It deals with inequities. It deals with looking at outcomes to look at how government faces and deals with this very real matter. And so I think across the nation, certainly globally, it certainly has shifted the lens, right? And unfortunately, it comes with cost, right? So the reality is there were sacrifices made to get us here, and that has been part of the foundation of the movement, if you will, right? There were always sacrifices that went forward, and then out of that birthed something that took us to the next level. And so this again is a crucial time because we do have a lens on racial equity. We do have a lens on reconciliation. We do have a lens on the communities that you and I serve and are part of that, again, have historically not been in these spaces that are now really sought after, right? So there are persons who would argue that if we do not have people like yourself, myself, and others, and those who are tuning into this program in the room, seated at the table, then they will not be successful in anything that they try to do to move forward. And so in that space, that's a win, right? It's a win because there are now more seats at the table. There are seats that are now actually with our names on it, right? Because it has to go forward that way. We still argue that there are some spaces that we will have to bring our own seats, right? We have to bring our own chairs to the table. But I think this has also allowed for a different type of fight, right? A different type of urgency, almost like an understanding of how important and how valuable we have always been and will continue to be to how we move this forward.
Absolutely. So we are unfortunately running out of time. There's so much I'd love to talk about more about, but I was hoping to give you the opportunity to just share any news, resources, updates on your work, or resources you'd like to share with our community.
So I think just moving forward, as we continue, we're in a historical time, also in the city of Boston. Certainly the Mayor Walsh, is soon to be our labor secretary in the nation under the Biden-Harris administration. And certainly we will have first ever woman and Black woman who will lead the city as acting mayor. And so I think there's opportunities certainly for persons to plug into city government and to explore how we all create a more equitable Boston. We are resource rich. I've always argued that, and so now that we are actually very much part of the makeup, right? Part of how we are recreating this new norm. Let our voices continue to be heard. So I would always submit that everybody who's listening on this call and on this broadcast continue to be loud and vocal in your voice, continue to advocate, continue to push where we believe that things are not just and right concerning our people, concerning our community, and then always to make yourself available to be part of the change, right? So in addition to the loud voice, also be prepared to sit at a table, be prepared to strategize with us, right? Be prepared to write and to think of how we move this forward collectively so that generations that come after us will also not only benefit from having seats at the table, but they will lead and build the table.
That is a great message. Thank you so much. Thank you for talking with us, Chief Resilience Officer Lori Nelson, and for being our guest on MALN Opinion Plus. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. You all have a wonderful day. Take care.
You too. Thank you. You too. Take care. Everyone, please tune in next week for another episode. Follow us on Twitter at MA Latino News and Instagram at MA_Latino News. I'm Belen Dumont with MALN Opinion Plus, and I will see you all next time.